To preface this video, I want to make clear that I'm genuinely a fan of Bethesda Game Studios' work. Not every game they've made is perfect, but truly, no game is, at least within the scope of my own gaming experiences. A lot of what I'm about to say is going to sound, it's going to sound like I really hate them. And to some of you, that might be a lot of fun. It's a neutral point for me. They've made mistakes, both seemingly intentional and otherwise. Whether you're able to balance the good with the bad or take bad with your good is dependent on how egregious you feel those points stand within your own sensibilities. Bethesda Game Studios, a development juggernaut whose initial claim to fame, that being the Elder Scrolls series, were one of the few game studios to have been projectile launched into the stratosphere of being one of the most known and respected game developers the world over. Bethesda is also notable for being the IP rights holder and developer to popularize Fallout within the broader lexicon of gaming conversation, with titles including Fallouts 3 and 4, as well as New Vegas and, oh god. Oh, it stinks. Look at that one. Bethesda Game Studios titles have a distinct quality that is unmistakably Bethesda Game Studios. This might seem circular in logic and likely a sentiment expressed a million times over as a weak defense of their games, but it's simply the best way to put it. Bethesda frequently faces a great deal of backlash for having a preferred format and style of game design that oftentimes is criticized as being too derivative or broadly similar to its prior releases. While I understand this sentiment, it's simply their unique style and approach to game design that ultimately won't gel with everyone. Elden Ring, the game that was widely acclaimed as one of the greatest games of its genre and year of release, that's effectively a pretty foundationally similar title to FromSoft's work on the Dark Souls series, except with an open world design and some changes made to accommodate that. This isn't meant as a criticism. No, I'm serious, I'm talking to you. Stop fucking typing. It's an expectation, and something we appreciate. Understanding a creation within the context of a company's culture is perfectly valid. Opening your favorite band's latest CD and finding absolutely zero traces of pre-existing DNA would be quite odd, and an astronomical risk for any creative pursuing this sort of thing. With both Fallout and the Elder Scrolls under their belt, the release of a new mainline Bethesda game generated quite a bit of commotion and a sense of hype amongst gamers. Bethesda's games, being synonymous with absolute freedom of interaction and industry-leading environmental storytelling, are often quite landmark during their time of release, and frequently lauded as industry-defining, as well as serving as era landmarks for modding communities for years to come. With how much praise I'm throwing at Bethesda right now, one might think from a simple glance that anything this company puts out is made out of solid gold and lauded by the general gaming community at large. As a point of reference, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the fifth installment in the series, stands as one of the most financially successful and renowned role-playing games of the last decade, boasting 60 of millions of copies sold since its 2011 launch. Fallout is no slouch either, having raked in hundreds of millions of dollars for Bethesda across the 5 entries released since being within their ownership as a brand. Not to mention the series is one of the visual beacons of the gaming industry, with the Fallout Boy being one of the most visually recognizable icons within the gaming space, next to Mario, Kratos, and the Merchant from Resident Evil. Bethesda launching a new IP, no, any large game developer announcing a new IP into the gaming world is something we seldom see due to the sheer risk and profitability factors. If it isn't Rainbow Six of Duty Creed of Redemption Part 3 2K29, most people don't know what it is, and sure as shit aren't spending $70 on it. So the reveal of Starfield to the vast majority of gamers felt both like an exciting new video game to drop 1,000 hours into, but also something intangibly difficult to hype, since a new IP means zero expectations. This reality will be a factor later in the video, as I suspect lack of transparency, a sin another spacefaring outer space adventure I can think of off the top of my head also faced,
all of this just
is an additional cut within the foundation of Bethesda's reputation. And so, Starfield released to Deluxe Edition owners on August 31st, signaling the beginning of a new era of Bethesda gaming. And yet, after nearly 25 years, Starfield feels different. Not entirely the game itself, which is indeed part of the reason we're seeing the reaction we're seeing, with a number of people calling it just Skyrim in space. But something else feels sour amongst the zeitgeist that is the gaming echo chamber. While it might be tempting to attribute the brewing discontent solely on the catastrophic launch of Fallout 76, I believe these issues have been compounding over decades and decades of time. Bethesda has, in various instances, inadvertently and advertently alienated specific fan bases and communities, whether through creative decisions, lack of awareness, financial motives, or a mix of these factors.
Do you guys not have phones?
But through all that, one thing remains evident to me. Bethesda's reputation is at the core of why Starfield is a case of death by a million cuts. Be sure to subscribe if you're liking the video. Thanks. I think a good place to start is with this simple question. What was your first Elder Scrolls game? Everybody tends to have a different answer, and as kids turn to teens and into adults, the question exceedingly leans in favor of Skyrim or none. I played Fallout. Whatever your answer is, whether it be Morrowind, Oblivion, which is the best one, or Skyrim, you likely hold that game to high regard as being one of the few games that was able to absorb you unlike any game ever had. Frequently, enthusiasts of earlier installments like Morrowind will criticize Bethesda for the simplification and restrictions they perceive in subsequent sequels. It's me. I'm bitchin'. Wherein I found immense depth and joy exploring Tamriel on my Xbox 360 back when I was a kid, I found Skyrim's console release to be demonstrably simple and unengaging. That isn't to say that Skyrim is a bad game, though most people aren't as diplomatic on my game good, your game literal human shit conversations as I can be. Taking a quick step back from this train of thought, I just want to ask you guys a random question. Who are the single most difficult people to please within circles of fiction? Is it A, fantasy genre fans, B, devotees of science fiction, or C, aficionados of history and politics? Why don't you guys chime in with your answers below? I won't give you time to guess. They're all fucking impossible. I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had about Bethesda that invariably lead to people reminiscing about their preferred Elder Scrolls game and contending that the simplification of the game's core mechanics transformed it from something akin to Dungeons and Dragons with the dice rolls turned off to The Hobbit. And I'm not talking about the books. I'm not even talking about the first movie either. From a very foundational level, it was clear that Bethesda's ambitions were less centered around making games that evolved and progressed in mechanical complexity and depth, but rather served as accessible entry points for game fans who usually always skip the cutscenes to get to the gameplay already. Which is so ironic because the only game PS5 fans, mind you, the current leading platform by a country mile, are interested in boasting about is a literal D&D simulator with more depth than your mom's. They simply have a reputation of oversimplification within a genre where the majority of the game's die-hard fans want more, not less. They're also the company that made Horse Armor, which was the very beginnings of microtransactions, which is also shitty. Continuing down the line, we come to one of my all-time favorite video game franchises of all time, the Fallout series. This one is fascinating because I believe its roots dig at a level that might have influenced my generation quite a bit, especially amongst tastemakers and modern content creators over the age of 25. I know, basically dead. Fallout, as a Bethesda property, begins at the number 3. Fallout 3 was Bethesda's very first game within the universe. You see, Bethesda was not the original rights holder of the Fallout license. That honor fell upon the now defunct gaming publisher Interplay. Black Isle Studios, the gaming collective responsible for in part creating the Fallout brand, are the roots of the near entirety of the Fallout identity we see marketed and sold at every GameStop and Target clothing rack worldwide. After Interplay's demise, Bethesda secured the rights to the Fallout IP and promptly embarked on creating a new installment installment in the series, employing their notorious Gamebryo engine, same engine used in The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. This marked the first occasion where Fallout's universe could be explored from a first-person perspective, and Fallout 3 would become one of the pioneering open-world single-player FPS games on the console market. Upon the release of Fallout 3, it swiftly earned accolades as a technological marvel and a milestone in entertainment, immersion, and world building. This sentiment resounded loudly for years, even following the release of the now beloved Fallout New Vegas. Nevertheless, as time marched onwards, a discernible undercurrent of discussion began to simmer within the Fallout community. A bit of controversy fueled by some questionable decisions made by Bethesda towards its hired developer at the time, Obsidian Games. To provide context, several prominent figures from Black Isle Studios had migrated to Obsidian, largely consisting of former staff. When game development studios disband, it's quite common for substantial portions of the original team to establish new ventures. So you frequently witness company leaders or key personnel departing or being let go from one role, only to swiftly regroup in a new company, often with a significant portion or nearly all of the original developers, preserving the company's initial culture and identity. This was a significant point of interest for gaming enthusiasts, realizing that Obsidian was tasked with creating a new Fallout game, marking the series' return to their creative hands since the closure of Black Isle Studios. Bethesda even offered Obsidian a bonus if Fallout New Vegas reached an 8.5 review score. Bethesda looked like the good guys for sharing the license with them, and game fans got to be excited to see a more true-to-form, lore-accurate form of the game they love so much. Oh, by the way, did I mention that with the release of Fallout 3, Bethesda took grand liberties with the game's tone, atmosphere, world, characters, and more, while still labeling it a third entry within the game's timeline of releases? The fans didn't like that very much, and needless to say, it's a bit of a reason why some older diehard fans refuse to show an ounce of respect to Bethesda and recent Fallout titles in particular. They took something that people grew up with and retconned and reframed huge chunks of it to suit a more marketable and simplified approach for general gaming audiences. Upon the release of Obsidian's Fallout New Vegas, it received solid reviews across the board, but failed to meet Bethesda's initial review benchmark of 85%. They missed it by 1%. A single percent stood between them and their necessary minimum review benchmark. That single point served to excuse Bethesda from any ounce of decency and meant that nobody at Obsidian got their rather large bonuses if the game was able to cross this hurdle. When word of this got out, it no doubt served to further sully Bethesda's reputation and began to depict them as bullies, especially towards the creatives who helped found the series they were profiting off of to begin with. So with that, we have Elder Scrolls fans upset at the oversimplification of their favorite game series, while in a genre denoted with extremely diehard and wide-reaching individuals within fantasy forms of media, and basically everyone and their mother pissed at Fallout because Bethesda screwed over the original artistic minds behind the series with ultra-tight deadlines, unreasonable work-life culture, and a missed bonus payday for all the insane strain they were under to begin with. Aside from baiting fans with near infinite re-releases of Skyrim, which, by the way guys, please stop buying those, it's why you aren't playing the next one, and the introduction of Creation Club content, which is effectively microtransactional versions of mods for PC users, Bethesda had one more giant load to drop on everyone. One more proverbial beast to bear fangs into the eyes of gamers everywhere.
Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads.
I think it's impossible to discuss the origin of the fervent distaste of Bethesda without mentioning the launch of Fallout 76. While 76 has its fan base and has gotten substantially more refined and content-rich since its launch, it's undeniable that its launch was emblematic of a Bethesda unwilling and unable to compromise financial stability over any other avenue of the game's existence. This financially driven, frenzied launch period gave fans, haters, and bystanders ammo for months, as Bethesda stumbled with pre-order bonuses, exterior marketing ventures, and anything resembling PR and community outreach. Fallout 76 fits within the timeline recent enough for nearly every generation currently alive on the planet to have some degree of cognizance of how embarrassing that launch was for Bethesda. Some argue the state of its release was indicative of Bethesda's financial desperation following such long periods of operation without consistent finance for microtransactions or a steady release schedule. I feel Bethesda's pivot into publishing was also emblematic of this financial insecurity in the company, which naturally makes sense for Microsoft to be the ones to bail them out and assist them in making financial operations less of a burden overall. They want to make monstrous amounts of money, but not being stressed about needing that monstrous amount up front to keep the doors open helps. But I mean, all of that is in the past. And yet we still see a large number of younger voices still screaming Bethesda's past transgressions. Reality is, every game console has generations, and every year has demographic changes. So it wouldn't surprise me if 99.9% of the kids on TikTok and YouTube calling Starfield an embarrassing, typical Bethesda game haven't really even played one of their more RPG-centric titles in their lives. Which is fine. I mean, a 17-year-old today was like, what, 5 years old in 2011?
Why are you crying?
When I was a snot-nosed 11-year-old kid who wore his gamer badge and played his video games the way a good gamer boy should, I looked up to the gaming outlets and television networks like G4 to serve as a reflection of gaming culture I so desperately wanted to be a part of. This meant that game reviews, previews, chat boards, and anything with the word game in front of it were places I cultivated and refined my own understanding of what a good game was and what a bad game was. No more was I interested in playing crappy licensed games of my favorite TV shows and movies growing up. I'm an adult now. Mommy, I want culture in my media. I won't stand for this drivel. Give me balance and inspired design. Give me Devil May Cry 4, Mommy. Oh my god. When gaming outlets collectively agreed that a game or series was considered to be exemplary of the brilliance of the industry at large, it would become a parroted talking point amongst everyone. We valued discussing things as absolute truths and found every opportunity to sling hate from the other side of the room to those unwashed PS3 kids or the Xbots. Inheritance of perspective isn't exactly a gaming exclusive notion. In fact, it infects every facet of humanity at large and is much deeper than pixels on a screen. However, by nature of this very reality, inherited perspectives and criticism with the intention of being perceived or declared a more informed and studied individual, that's definitely something pre-existing, but compounded by unrestricted internet access. Some real touch grass type shit. The good old days. Eventually, it can quickly become a battle of figuring out if those who have genuine complaints are actually individuals who in good faith tried something, and distinguishing between others who are taking a broad and fast approach and copy their own perspectives from the zeitgeist in an attempt to capitalize off of it, whether it be via ego padding or actual social media standing capital. Likes, retweets, stuff like that. I really need to make clear that I am not talking about individuals who have played these games, tried these games, ran into bugs with these games, and ultimately just didn't have a good time with them. You are excluded from what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who get joy from parroting opinions that they have no founding or understanding over. Okay, if this is the entire shit sandwich on the plate, I'd say it's pretty obvious why people take issue with Bethesda and their games. I didn't mention the overpromises of Fallout 76 and the iconic Bethesda trademark of dumbing their sequels down with Fallout 4, which is a testament to just how long this video could be. There's been millions of tiny incidents that have amounted to Bethesda having such a bad reputation, but none of these explanations or reasons really articulate why people are so mad at Bethesda today. Not only is this a new full-fat Bethesda game, something we haven't truly seen since Fallout 4 in 2015, but it's a console exclusive as well. That's right, this game will never make its way to a PS console due to Bethesda's ownership belonging to the manufacturer of the company in direct competition with them. Which means not only are people leveraging, and to be fair, rightly so, the many controversies and issues Bethesda has brought upon themselves and their countless diehards, myself included, but they're also entrenched in the revitalized console war. This makes things rather tricky, since the majority of the conversation against Bethesda is leveraging ammo somewhere someone heard from someone else whose older brother did play a Bethesda game once. But that's inherited hate, and something Bethesda earned through ill will to their communities and adjacent studios and fan bases. The discourse you're seeing around the game appears to be 30% genuine and decent criticism, and 70% an actual visual representation of a Fortnite pregame lobby, except everyone has several bans on their account and they don't even play video games. Ultimately, this video will be rather sparse on direct criticisms of Starfield, since I intend to release a proper in-depth review of the game itself without the hysteria and groupthink surrounding the release itself. That's sort of what this video is for. But I feel I'd be remiss to not at least briefly touch upon the issues even Bethesda fans are expressing about the game itself. Because sure, the issues people have can be anywhere from deep-seated to echo chamber fodder. Ultimately, Starfield has issues with the game itself. These issues, when compounded on the very real reality that in our current year of 2024, design decisions such as invisible wall prompts and near infinite loading screens aren't just immediately thrown out in the design room, is a testament to where we've gotten thus far. I have my own fringe conspiracy theories as to why these issues exist, and they all start with a capital S. Ultimately, these issues do serve to harm the overall package Bethesda spent the better part of a decade putting together. So where do we stand with Starfield as a product, and how does it impact Bethesda's reputation as a game developer? Invisible walls are a very real thing that players are running into in Starfield. While the boundaries are rather large, they're ultimately incredibly questionable coming from a studio whose entire claim to fame was creative, ever-expanding, and breathtaking environmental designs that felt near limitless compared to their contemporaries. And while game developers have come a long way since Fallout 3, the reality is, open-world gaming is the trend of the decade, meaning a great deal of the awe-inspiring shit we're seeing in Starfield are things other developers have seemingly done and done better. No Man's Sky, a game frequently brought up in direct comparison to Starfield by people who likely played it for a week and never played it for a second thereafter, bars, was simply able to do Interstellar breadth better, and with more finesse than Bethesda ever could. And while I'll touch on my defense and gripes I ultimately really do have with the design choice in another video, it does, at least on paper, paint Bethesda as a studio losing touch with its ability to push boundaries and create technological marvels in the gaming space. Fast traveling does much the same and with more fervent consequences. Ultimately, every conceivable playstyle in Starfield will run into the issues of loading screens. While short when installed on an SSD, still ultimately breaks up large swaths of content, leading to an experience that ultimately feels like a series of designed sections rather than a cohesive open world. And while they don't bother me as much as some, they ultimately are far too frequent for even my own sensibilities. The areas you visit tend to provide a great deal of freedom, detail, and complexity, especially when you're trying to even remotely map out some of the cities and their many inhabitants and nuances. No, the planets are barren as hell, and often very repetitive, and that means exploration is a major crux in people's enjoyment. Something that indeed made me take pause and reconsider how to approach and enjoy the game on its own terms. This isn't a traditional Bethesda style of content delivery and format, and that's not okay to some and adaptable for others. But ultimately, this video, once again, isn't about criticizing, understanding, and identifying with Starfield as a whole. It's about understanding where the negative sentiment Bethesda is drawing from social media is coming from. So it's impossible to not see infinite loading screens as anything other than a joke in the modern era, especially when we're only a few short years away from what will very well be the most impressive open world we've ever seen fleshed out in gaming. The final point I'd like to address is Bethesda's consistent use of the creation engine, the game engine of which every Bethesda game has in one way or another been created from. Yes, the creation engine has gone by over 100 names, but is ultimately derived of the very same tech that was used to build the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, a game that came out when the dinosaurs were still around. While it's quite common for game developers to iterate and keep their own in-house game engine technology over the course of decades, rather than purchasing and learning off-the-shelf game engines such as Unreal or Unity, this doesn't mean that they've come with such fervent distaste as Bethesda's in-house game engine has drawn. Creative Engine 2.0, the engine used and updated for Starfield, bears all the familiar marks of a Bethesda game. Many find these telling signs of jank and poor engine stability to be quite unsightly and call for Bethesda to reconsider its use. Now, I'll be the weirdo who defends the use of this game engine. Bethesda and their relationship with modders have always been a symbiotic and net positive situation. Modders understand and know this game engine, and Bethesda's continued use of it might come off as incompetence, when in reality the engine was designed for the very same level of customization and freedom a great deal of people laud over with games such as Dungeons & Dragons as a mechanically free and customizable gaming experience. Bear in mind, Bethesda has been including built-in moddability since Morrowind, allowing everything from tweaking individual stats to personal tastes to creating huge swaths of fan-made worlds to share with others. Modding is a staple of the Bethesda game. Virtualizing this sentiment and allowing for vertical and horizontal freedom, the likes of which Bethesda has allowed players, means hard-coding anything could prove to be roadblocks and ultimately restrictive to player freedom. While this notion seems quite forgiving of Bethesda, no design decision exists without consequences. And boy oh boy, is it clear there's been consequences. Playing a Bethesda game for longer than 10 minutes without seeing something absolutely fucking stupid and immersion breaking is super unlikely to happen to the average player. What this means is that for every consideration made for freedom of expression and moddability comes with it 40,000 bugs that will detrimentally stick with every individual who experiences their games, leading to a pretty fair impression that they make games quite poorly. And I won't necessarily fight you there. Bethesda games, at least for me, are always purchased with a twofold consideration. The first being, is this a game that in its current state I could find myself deeply indulging in the world and characters in a way that makes me feel that I'll get my money's worth? And the second being, based on the atmosphere and state of enthusiasm of the core fan community, will this serve to be a fruitful and enjoyable modding platform for me to experiment with? Oftentimes, Bethesda nails the latter, and in the case of Skyrim is fully capable of not nailing the former, at least to me. Starfield was close to not nailing the former again, as I'm not that big a fan of space and sci-fi, but did ultimately come away surprised at just how interesting and visually compelling I found my time with Starfield to be. However, in a seemingly first-time instance, Bethesda has gone beyond nailing the latter and full-on nuked it with a million thumbs ups from me. The broad availability of surface real estate allotted to Starfield means the degree of diversity and modding capabilities are near limitless. This is Bethesda at its most Little Big Planet, and I am beyond excited to see what stories and adventures modders make, especially amidst the controversial era of AI design and voice acting that we currently live in. Ultimately, Bethesda's use of the creation engine makes them look like they're bad game designers, and while they do questionable things in pursuit of their own unique fingerprint of their releases that ultimately get tweaked in the first week of release, it does ultimately make them look worse than what they're capable of. Bethesda's long-standing hatred has come down to their stern and ignorant stance towards its many communities and fans, but also the state of their game releases as buggy and feature incomplete titles. Through short-term monetary cash grabs, they have pushed their way into the collective consciousness of the gaming masses and become one of the single largest game developers in the entirety of the industry. However, having done so, they've lost the good graces of gamers from nearly every single demographic through one controversy or another. While I know Bethesda finds 1,000,001 ways to be hated, they wouldn't still be around if they didn't just have a way with their design processes that truly did compel and inspire creativity and inspiration in the countless fans they've accrued through all the years they've been a company. Modding is a major part of the Bethesda ecosystem, and while some mods work towards reworking what Bethesda has done in order to fix the games, oftentimes players are adding more content to expand, engross, and fill out their world beyond the immense amount of work Bethesda already does put into its stories, settings, characters, and items. While what rests beneath the surface is a nuanced, fun, diverse, and gorgeous video game, when it's not doing this shit, when it comes to the fundamental evolutions of the game formula, utilization of their money to put into research and development, a superior platform which they can develop their games, what it all boils down to is Starfield's a pretty good Bethesda game. But when nobody likes you, there's always somebody else singing a similar song who you can listen to guilt-free.